training in the past or haven't had to do it in the past, so it's a completely new task for them.
That's wonderful. Can you give us some specifics of the conversations you've had where you've helped somebody understand how to work more effectively inside of their new position?
Well, I can think of one example, and that really stems back to this individual who was coming on board being more of an independent thinker. And even though that person was an independent thinker, the company wanted that to add flavor to the department and to bring on someone who has new and fresh ideas. But the culture there is one of team, and there's a lot of bureaucracy in terms of heavy rules, guidelines, policies that need to be followed. And so sometimes we find that that independent person has real difficulty, even though they have the best intentions and they want to work within those constraints, find it a little bit more difficult. So being able to have that conversation with the person up front and helping them to understand some of the people they'll be working with and how they may be able to partner with that person can be beneficial in helping them feel like I have a fair amount of opportunities where I can be myself and figure out how I want to go from point A to point B. But on the other hand, I know what my limitations are.
That's a great example that you're using, Heidi, because if, this person is being brought on and they said, what we're looking for is someone here to truly be independent. I love that about you, and that's what I'm looking for. That person coming in and truly acting independent, not understanding what you've just described as a very bureaucratic setup in a place that is really much more rules-driven than was conveyed in that earlier conversation, that person could find themselves certainly getting in conflicts that they didn't intend to simply by acting independently, which is what they thought what was being looked to them for.
Exactly. And it's a good idea, too, to have that type of conversation with the client before they even make that move to bring them on board, to really understand this is who you have here.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to be able to use that independence and creativity to your advantage, here's the way that you'll need to operate with this person, because you don't want to squelch their enthusiasm and their excitement about having that degree of autonomy. You just want to sometimes corral it just a hair.
Can you give us an example also, Heidi, of how you've helped a new employee understand a little bit more about their new manager and how to work most effectively with them?
Sure. We could talk about the case of someone who really is looking for a fair degree of direction and support from management, and perhaps the manager is able to give that to them, but we have someone who is maybe not as assertive and confident enough as they should be to speak up and ask for it. So in that case, we may be encouraging the person to make sure that you raise your hand or send an email or stop by the boss's office, because it's okay. Particularly in the first couple of months, they're looking for you to ask all that you need to ask, so that after your initial indoctrination period, they are going to expect you to be a little bit more independent and self-managing. But particularly in the beginning, it's really important to make sure that you get clarification if you are feeling like I'm not getting enough of what I need.
You just described a situation where they want someone to ask a lot of questions and then get very independent so that they don't have to ask the questions. And that would be a great thing to know up front and get really clear about, because I can think of a number of different ways in which somebody would misread those signals and as a result either be shy about asking the questions or ask too many questions or continue asking questions way too long and be sending the wrong message.
Right. Another thing that I think that these newly onboarded individuals get out of having an initial coaching session is that they get a feeling that the company and the manager are committed to helping them become a very valuable employee. That They want to help ensure that the person has whatever they need to help them become successful.
Right. And that in and of itself is a valuable message, because it's saying to that individual, this company's investing in you right up front. I'm curious, Heidi, when you're having these conversations with a new employee, is it mixed? Is the manager on also in that call, or do most people prefer to do it so that the individual just has a one-on-one consultation with you?
Depends on the company and depends on the manager and what the employee looks like. It could be any of those things. Normally, initially, we'll do a session with just the person so that the person and I can get a better feel for each other.
Right.
Sometimes they feel less intimidated. The manager's not on the phone, and they'll be a little bit more open when we have conversation. And of course, I have an advantage in terms of I know what their profile looks like. So if they look like they're a little timid or they may not want to talk, I may find ways to try to engage them and get them a little bit more excited about the conversation. Or if I can see it's somebody who may be giving a little pushback from the start, I can know that ahead of time and figure out a way to work around that.
Now, we're talking about this, Heidi, as sort of an introduction to the company, as sort of a one-time intervention. But do you have some companies where they also have you do this more than once with a new employee?
Absolutely. It can certainly be a one-time thing, as you said, a one-on-one with that individual to give them a little bit better footing in terms of stepping through that door and being more prepared for what's coming.
Right.
In particular, if it's a person who we may think might need a little bit more support, the manager might decide that this is something that we might want to try for the first month, the second month. We might assess how that person is responding. So it could be something that's a one-time thing. It could be several sessions. It could be something that's ongoing over time. And depending upon what we find out along the way, we may want to pull that manager into the conversation along the way as well.
Excellent. So it's a very, very flexible approach then.
Absolutely.
Really, depending upon the individual and the situation, it can be either a great one-time first introduction to the company, to the new manager, to how to work most effectively in this new environment, or a couple sessions just to help and make sure that everything's going smoothly and that the investment that the company has made in this new employee, it pays off in a very short period of time.
I would say that's true. I like to let them know that just because we're having this conversation now doesn't mean that at the end of the day you take the information that I gave you or you take the report you received and you put it in a desk drawer and you ignore it. So I like the conversation or the person to think about it as, I may not be telling you anything you don't already know about yourself, but I may be presenting it in a different way so that you can use it to your advantage. So if you have some strengths, don't just keep them to yourself. Volunteer to help or support your other teammates where you're really good, and conversely, maybe from them you can learn some tricks of the trade in terms of helping you become stronger in one of the areas that you might look weak.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Heidi.
All right, you're welcome.
That's great. And George, Heidi was sharing with us how important it is for a new employee to understand as much about themselves as they possibly can, as well as about their manager and where he or she is coming from. On top of that, it's also important for a new employee to understand the situation they're walking into.
That's exactly it. And not only understanding it, but shaping it. I think typically what happens, there are two types of approach that people have. They either have the, I'm going to sit back and observe mode. First 3 to 6 months, I'm just going to feel my way into the position.
Make sure I don't make a mistake.
Right. And of course, the organization is looking at you saying, why aren't you making an impact?
You're not making a mistake. You're also not making an impact.
Yes.
You're not doing anything.
And then the other side of it are the people who say, I know what works.
Yeah.
I've got a history of success. I know how to make this work. And of course they go in there, but it doesn't work in this situation. So now what do I do?
It's interesting because it reminds me of a study we did where we asked a lot of our clients, how long does it take you to hire an individual? And many of them had very rigorous processes that, depending upon the position, could take 2-3 months to bring somebody on board who was just right for that position. And then later in a separate survey, we asked them, how long does it take to realize you've hired the wrong person? And it was amazing because, I mean, most people would say, within a week. Some people were saying, that day. So they've gone through this incredibly long process. But organizations, as you're saying, don't give it the attention.
Absolutely. And we fall into a false sense of security. And the organization thinks we've hired the perfect person. And the candidate thinks I've found the perfect job. And of course, that's not the real situation. But what's interesting is that we forget that from the second people come into contact with us, they're evaluating, assessing, and judging us. So from the moment a manager comes on board, the organization is looking at him or her and saying, are they going to make it? Are they any good? Do I want to follow this person? Because you're only a leader if people decide to follow you. So you come on board, and if you don't have a plan for what are my leadership principles, how do I show up as a leader? How do I communicate with my people? How do I communicate with my peers? If you don't have a plan, you will be reactive. And if you're being reactive, you probably won't be putting your best foot forward.
You know, that reminds me of one of our clients who's using this process for leadership. Helen Slavin is the former Chief Learning Officer at WellStar Health Systems and now a strategic consultant to this world-class health provider, which is based in Marietta, Georgia. It's great to talk with you again, Helen.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Tell us, at WellStar, I know you were involved in helping to create a very extensive onboarding process. Can you tell us a little bit about the hiring and onboarding process there?
Sure, I'd be happy to. What we created is a 1-year onboarding process for all new leaders at WellStar, which starts from pre-hire all the way through the end of their first year.
Now, that's quite an extensive commitment.
It is. It's a big commitment, but of course we know that bringing new leaders on board and getting them started and helping them be successful brings all kinds of benefits to the organization and to the individuals that we're taking a lot of time to bring into the organization.
Mm-hmm. How do you define a leader? What position would that be, Helen?
Currently, it's manager level and above,
mm-hmm.
which at WellStar is about 500 individuals.
500 individuals. Yeah. Tell us then in terms of your leadership, and is it not just in hiring, but if someone is promoted, is there the same onboarding process?
Right now, the onboarding process is only for brand new leaders to WellStar because it's through the pilot phase, but still sort of in its infancy in terms of using this process.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a plan to expand it to people who are being promoted within WellStar as well, moving from one level to another. I should probably say that in addition to the onboarding process, WellStar has a full set of leadership development programs that start from a program called Learning to Lead, which is for people who are being looked at for leadership positions, or maybe they've been picked to run a team or a project within their department, all the way through senior leader programs as well. So in addition to the onboarding process, there's a full set of leadership development programs that go along with that.
Excellent, excellent. You said there's a year-long commitment the new person being brought in as well as the organization is making here, mm-hmm. which is wonderful, and I think it speaks volumes for WellStar in terms of its commitment to making sure that leaders do in fact succeed. Because oftentimes what happens is a lot of time is spent on selecting that individual and then getting that seat filled, and then it's like on to the next situation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that in lots of organizations that I've been a part of, that is kind of something that you run the risk of if you don't have an intentional plan that kind of touches base with the new leader, but also that hiring leader, the person who's hired them, on a regular basis to kind of just make sure that we're doing the right things to onboard people. And that's what the process does.
Tell us some of the things that happen early on to help a new manager succeed.
When a position is posted, organizational learning is notified by recruitment. Organizational learning is our learning function at WellStar, and so we're aware that there's a position. An organization development consultant is assigned to meet with that hiring manager while they're still in the beginnings of hiring to talk about the role, talk about what the hopes are for that position, talk a little bit about what the core competencies are for the position, and then to begin planning what a likely onboarding process would be for that position. Then once the position is filled and there's somebody that's being hired, the OD consultant sits down again with the hiring manager and now with the new leader, and they have a similar conversation that's about fleshing out the onboarding plan and really planning out what the next year in terms of having that person assimilated into the organization is going to look like.
I'm intrigued by the learning to lead because I know when people talk about leaders, one of the things that they certainly want is a sense of fairness and consistency. So that's great that you have a program in which you come across, I'm sure, with your core values and principles. What is involved in that?
It's an 8-week program, and it is just what you mentioned. It's built on a performance map, which basically teaches new leaders all of the key behaviors that they're expected to have at WellStar in order to be successful. And so it walks through from bringing a new person on board all the way to onboarding them, coaching and counseling, the HR processes, employee discipline process, but also reward and recognition, setting goals, all the key kind of functions that on a people level leaders need to be aware of and really need to know how to do. So it sets those expectations. It gives people skills and tools in order